Hello, my name is Christian Widener, and I'd like to welcome you to the second edition of The Temple Revealed. My first video on the temple location got over 334,000 views, and I got a lot of really great feedback. In response to those comments, I've reworked and expanded this video with a ton of new content to cover a lot more ground on the subject, which I hope makes the case even clearer. Here are some of the important new points I'm going to address. Understanding the ancient terrain, how the threshing floor was lost, tradition in the Dome of the Rock, and what about the arch that was found under the Golden Gate? The aqueduct levels and cisterns around the temple. Was there a spring under the temple? What about the Fortress Antonia, the Northern Fosse objection, and why does any of this matter? Let's begin. Because the temple location has been debated for so long, many people think that there just isn't enough evidence available to know for sure where the temple sat before its destruction. Which is a reasonable conclusion given the many attempts to decisively locate the temple over the years. But the kind of argument I'm making here for the temple location hasn't been presented like this before. What I've done is to sort through historical reports and archaeological findings to demonstrate that there is some prima facie evidence that alone is sufficient to establish the proper location of the temple. Now, even if that seems hard to believe, I hope you'll hear me out. I'm going to show how recognizing just two major landmarks is the key to knowing for certain the temple's former location. And I'm going to explain some of the major reasons why the other proposed locations just wouldn't work. After this presentation, I hope you will agree that there really are some key landmarks that have been hiding in plain sight. It's all laid out in my book, The Temple Revealed, which I think proves beyond a reasonable doubt where the former Jewish temple sat on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. I started looking into this question in 2008, and I can tell you that sorting through all of the endless historical and archaeological reports connected to the temple was like trying to untangle a knotted up fishing line. But I'm firmly convinced that the answer can now be known beyond a reasonable doubt. The key to finding the temple location is actually quite simple. You have to identify reliable landmarks or remnants of the temple that was destroyed. Now that can be pretty difficult given that not one stone was left on another, and a lot has happened to this site over the past 2,000 years to obscure whatever was left. Plus, no archaeological investigations have even been allowed on the Temple Mount, so that makes it pretty tough to get to the bottom of things. But what if there were some remaining visible landmarks? Ones that could show us exactly where the temple used to sit. If it can be shown that there are some existing structures that point out the exact location of the former temple, which have been hiding in plain sight because of modern misidentification, wouldn't that be worth examining? So how was the temple location chosen in the first place? The answer is found in 2 Chronicles. 2 Chronicles 3:1. Then Solomon began to build the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem, on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to his father David. It was on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite, the place provided by David. But what is a threshing floor? It was a wide, flat area where the chaff could be separated from the grain. A threshing sledge would be dragged around in circles by an ox or donkey. Now, the best threshing floor surfaces were flat, solid rock, like the one seen here at a site in Israel called Deir Saman. Of course, threshing floors weren't always solid rock, and the scriptures are not explicit on that point either. But the traditional Jewish view is that it was bedrock, and they called it the foundation stone. And so, are there any flat threshing-type floor surfaces visible on the Temple Mount? Yes, there is a possible threshing floor surface on the Temple Mount, but only one, and it is found underneath the Dome of the Spirits. The Dome of the Spirits is a small stone cupola with a dark metal roof. It's found on the northwest corner of the platform near the Dome of the Rock. Built by Ottomans in the 16th century, it is also known as Kubat al-Arwah, Underneath the dome, there is a large, flat, and pockmarked stone surface. It's a part of the original bedrock of Mount Moriah, and it is a good candidate for the pierced, perforated, or pockmarked stone reported by the Bordeaux pilgrim in 333 AD. And in the building itself, where stood the temple which Solomon built, there are 2 statues of Hadrian, and not far from the statues there is a perforated stone, to which the Jews come every year and anoint it, bewail themselves with groans, rend their garments, and so depart. The Latin phrase lapis pertussis has been translated as pierced or perforated stone, but the sense of the term is as in a sieve. Therefore, the Bordeaux pilgrim was likely referring to a pockmarked stone, which could also be described that way. The most well-known case for recognizing that this is the site of the threshing floor of Aruna in the Holy of Holies of the Temple was made by Dr. Asher Kaufman in 2004 in his book, The Temple Mount, Where is the Holy of Holies? I'm just picking up and strengthening his arguments with new findings. For example, take a close look at the surface of the floor. It is strikingly flat and would be an excellent candidate for a threshing floor. In fact, if one was so inclined, they could even thresh grain on it today. And it is quite similar to the surface of the threshing floor at Deir Saman. And the next question is, are there any other surfaces like this on the Temple Mount? Well, inside the Dome of the Rock, there is another piece of bedrock. It's called Al-Sakra. It is the only other known bedrock candidate for a threshing floor inside the 36-acre Temple Mount. And while it has plenty of evidence of being cut and modified in the past, based on the remaining areas of natural and irregular rock surfaces, I would argue that it has never been flat. And if it was never flat, then it was never a threshing floor. And if it was never a threshing floor, then it can't mark the location of the temple. To which I would add one more piece of logic. If the threshing floor was how the temple was located in the first place, then of necessity any competing proposal for a temple location is substantially weakened if it can't identify a threshing floor candidate. For example, the elevation plan of Mount Moriah from the Recovery of Jerusalem survey conducted by Sir Charles Wilson and Sir Charles Warren in 1871 is shown here. And you can see the Temple Mount area in blue. Now the Mount of Olives is just east of the Temple Mount. The Dome of the Rock platform is also visible and is shown here in green. The areas that were flat and level in the days when Arun the Jebusite was threshing grain are shown here in the green outline. The areas that were steep hillsides in the days when Arun the Jebusite was threshing grain are indicated in the yellow outline. The Ophel area is also indicated here, which was immediately south of the Temple Mount and was also an area of steep hillsides. The proposed northern temple location in line with the Golden Gate is shown here in the green square. The area of the proposed southern temple locations is also shown here in the red square. The area where a threshing floor would need to be located in order to accommodate the temple layout is shown here in a blue rectangle. Only the central and northern locations would have been suitable threshing areas prior to building the temple. Therefore, we can confidently exclude the southern areas and the Ophel area, because they wouldn't have been areas that you could have had a threshing floor. Accepting that the site of the temple was a threshing floor in antiquity, the ancient terrain limits the possible locations. And therefore, the southern locations and Ophel area just aren't tenable. Now, some have argued that this 10-foot diameter area of bedrock isn't big enough to be a threshing floor. But that would be mistaken on 2 counts. So first, the book of Judges says that Gideon threshed grain in a winepress. And wine presses of 6 to 7 feet in diameter are found all over Israel. So threshing grain in an area that's 10 feet in diameter is certainly possible. Second, this entire platform was built after the destruction of the temple. And it was leveled to and built around this flat area of bedrock. The bedrock here was clearly cut to accommodate the paving stones. in which case the flat area would have been even larger in the past. Now some do claim that this is a paving stone and not bedrock at all, but Charles Warren and Charles Wilson found it to be bedrock on their initial site survey, and it has also been modernly confirmed to be bedrock by the Israel Antiquities Authority. The point is that what we are looking at today is what has survived 2 complete destructions of the temple, followed by additional reworking in order to incorporate it into the current platform that was built after the last destruction. And therefore, this area is still a very compelling threshing floor candidate. But if the bedrock under the Dome of the Rock wasn't a threshing floor, how did it become associated with the temple? The answer comes from understanding the history of the Temple Mount after its destruction by Titus in 70 AD. After the destruction of the temple, the first person to build on the Temple Mount was Emperor Hadrian, circa 135 AD. Based on historic accounts, it can be inferred that he built both a large platform and a temple to Jupiter. It was likely a smaller version of the Temple of Olympian Zeus, or Jupiter, in Athens, that was completed by Hadrian in 131 AD. Incorporated into that platform, there were 2 large pieces of bedrock. One was used as a cornerstone for the new temple. The other piece was so flat and level, it was used as a reference to set the level of the whole platform. Here's how a temple could have fit on the platform using the Al-Saqra stone as a cornerstone. But a more likely layout that also allows for the 2 statues of Hadrian reported by the Bordeaux pilgrim is shown in red. The second layout aligns better with the cuts in the northwest corner of the Al-Saqra stone. During the reign of Constantine in the 4th century, all pagan temples were destroyed, but the platform would have survived. By the 5th century, the Temple Mount was turned into a trash dump by the Byzantines, and it remained that way until the 7th century, when Jerusalem surrendered in 638 AD to Omar ibn al-Khattab, who took control of the Temple Mount area. They cleaned the whole area and they found a platform with a prominent rock exposed near its center. The flat threshing floor bedrock stone was now disguised and looked just like a giant paving stone. And there was no cupola covering it at that time either. It's easy to understand why they would have attached significance to the prominent stone, but not the flat level one. After that, they built Al-Aqsa Mosque on the far southern end, and the Dome of the Rock around Al-Saqra. Soon after, the Temple Mount became haram, and access was forbidden to non-Muslims. Eutychius of Alexandria, around 876 AD, gives the earliest report that the Dome of the Rock marks the location of the temple. By the time the Crusaders arrived, this Christian tradition had become firmly established, and the rest is history. A little over 1,000 years of tradition is really the best evidence there is for the Dome of the Rock location. But as a temple landmark, the Al-Saqra stone just doesn't stand up to the accounts of Scripture. Which brings us to the next major landmark of the temple: recognizing the Golden Gate as a true landmark. The Golden Gate is arguably the most iconic gate in Jerusalem. It is recognized by Muslims, Jews, and Christians as the Messianic Gate. To Jews, it will be the Messiah of Israel. To many Christians, this is the gate that Jesus entered on Palm Sunday, and it is where he will one day re-enter Jerusalem in power and glory. Then the man brought me to the gate facing east, and I saw the glory of the God of Israel coming from the east. His voice was like the roar of rushing waters, and the land was radiant with his glory. The glory of the Lord entered the temple through the gate facing east. Then the Spirit lifted me up and brought me into the inner court, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple. Muslims also believe that this gate has a role to play in the last days, and that Jesus will re-enter Jerusalem through this gate on Judgment Day. However, as seen here, this gate has been walled up in stone to presumably prevent this prophecy from coming to pass. But this is exactly what was foretold. Then the man brought me back to the outer gate of the sanctuary, the one facing east, and it was shut. The Lord said to me, "This gate is to remain shut. It must not be opened, and no one may enter through it. It is to remain shut because the Lord, the God of Israel, has entered through it." So there is a prophetic case for the authenticity of the Golden Gate, but is it really a reliable landmark? Because many modern archaeologists have attempted to refute the ancient origins of the Golden Gate. So who's right? According to rabbinic tradition and direct inference from Scripture, the outer eastern gate of the temple was directly in line with the temple itself, as shown in the temple model at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. This testimony of the rabbis is clearly recorded in Mishnah Berachot 9:5. One should not show disrespect to the eastern gate, because it is in direct line with the Holy of Holies. And in the commentary on Mishnah Berachot by Obadiah Bartanura, all of the gates were aligned with one another. The eastern gate, the gate of the Etzrath Nashim, the gate of the Etzrath Yisrael, the entrance of the Ulam, the sanctuary, and the Holy of Holies in the days of the first temple. We also have the testimony of Scripture that implies that the east gate was directly in front of, i.e. facing the temple. We know this because gates look straight ahead, and also because there are measurements given between the inner and outer gates on the east, which can only happen if they are in a direct line with one another. Then he went to the east gate. He climbed its steps and measured the threshold of the gate, and the threshold of the gate next to the portico facing the temple was 1 rod deep. Then he measured the distance from the inside of the lower gateway to the outside of the inner court. It was 100 cubits on the east side as well as on the north. Therefore, most rabbis say that the Golden Gate can't be the east gate because the gate isn't directly in front of the Dome of the Rock, which is where most people believe the temple was located. But is that objection valid? Particularly when we consider the archaeological finding that affirms that the only ancient location in the eastern wall of the Temple Mount that could be the ancient East Gate, or the Shushan Gate in the days of Herod, is the Golden Gate. And it has been reported that there are 2 massive monolithic gateposts still visible today inside the structure of the Golden Gate, which are also part of the ancient outer eastern wall. And just for reference, the gateposts are the size of the stones at Stonehenge. Archaeologist Dr. Lean Rittmeyer wrote in his book The Quest on page 178, "These monolithic gateposts may have been part of the earliest wall section of the Temple Mount walls. Even if they were inserted at a later date, it follows that as no remains of any other pre-Herodian eastern gateway are known, the site of the Golden Gate is the only possible location for the earlier Shushan Gate." That finding is huge, but it goes against the findings of other archaeologists who insist that the Golden Gate is a construction of the Byzantines in the 7th century or of the Umayyads after that. However, a careful review of reports from ancient historians and pilgrims affirms what archaeologists like Dr. Lean Rittmeyer have determined. Because there have been periodic confirmations of the existence of the Golden Gate faithfully recorded for the past 1900 years, including a testimony from the Piacenza pilgrim that comes from half a century before some scholars propose that the Byzantines could have built the gate. The Piacenza pilgrim wrote in the 6th century, "The valley of Gethsemane is also at this place called Jehoshaphat. We climbed by many steps up from Gethsemane to the gate of Jerusalem. This gate of the city is next to the gate Beautiful, which was part of the temple, and its threshold and entablature are still in position there." The reference to Gethsemane tells us that the place called Jehoshaphat is the Kidron Valley that lies between the temple and the Mount of Olives. And the eastern gate of Jerusalem that's mentioned is now called the Lion's Gate. That means the gate Beautiful, Porta Speciosa, that he said is nearby and was part of the temple, is best understood as today's Golden Gate. The names of the gates of Jerusalem have changed many times over the ages, but this description should make it very difficult to mistake it for any gate other than the Golden Gate. Plus, we have exactly this situation shown on the Madaba map, which comes from the same time period as the Piacenza pilgrim. Notice the small gate with no road leading to it next to the main gate. But the most compelling report comes from Flavius Josephus. In AD 100, 30 years after the destruction of the temple, he wrote this. Flavius Josephus in Wars of the Jews. And now the Romans, judging that it was in vain to spare what was round about the holy house, burnt all those places, as also the remains of the cloisters and the gates, two excepted, the one on the east side and the one on the south, both which, however, they burnt afterwards. However, the Golden Gate is mainly made of stone. That it was burned does not mean that it was destroyed. We can deduce this logically, but we also know it later because Josephus says that the 10th Roman legion held ceremonies there. And now the Romans, upon the flight of the seditious into the city, and upon the burning of the holy house itself, and of all the buildings round about it, brought their ensigns to the temple, and set them over against its eastern gate, and there did they offer sacrifices to them, and there did they make Titus imperator. Finally, the book of Nehemiah suggests that the eastern gate wasn't destroyed when Jerusalem was razed by Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BC. Conspicuously, as the record of repaired areas is given by Nehemiah, the east gate is not mentioned as needing any repair. However, the keeper of the east gate is mentioned, but only as assisting with the repairs of the other parts of the wall. The primary reports about the Golden Gate down through the ages range from Nicola de Poggibonsi in AD 1346, all the way down to Josephus in AD 100, and again even the indirect reference in Nehemiah. And so we see there's plenty of historic support for the authenticity of the Golden Gate. So what does this all mean? That we have a very solid track record of reports down through the ages affirming that the Golden Gate remained largely intact. Of course, that doesn't mean it was never modified or repaired. It simply means that it's exactly where it's always been. Despite any modifications or repairs that were necessary over the millennia. And here's another major observation that supports these conclusions. The bedrock underneath the dome is directly in line with the Golden Gate. Standing on the Temple Mount, looking east through the Dome of the Spirits, it's clear that you are in a direct line with the Golden Gate, which is also easily seen looking from an aerial view. Notice that the line passing through the Dome of the Spirits is both perpendicular to the eastern wall of the Golden Gate and parallel to the northern boundary. Now, the probability that these two things could be aligned by accident is 1 in 1426, or a 0.07% chance. The other way to look at that is it's a 99.93% chance that the alignment is no coincidence. That means that there's a 99.93% chance that the bedrock underneath the Dome of the Spirits really is the threshing floor of Aruna, and that it marks the location of the Holy of Holies of the temple. And here's a diagram of what the temple layout could look like, with the temple inside of a 500 cubit square. Notice that the Golden Gate, in its current position, is about 250 cubits from the northern boundary. Another question some may have is about James Fleming, who fell into a tomb in front of the Golden Gate in 1969. Underneath the gate, he saw this arch. Many have assumed that this arch was part of the original Eastern Temple Gate, but Dr. Lean Rittmeyer believes it is just a remnant of the support structure for a walkway that would have led up to the East Gate, which I agree with. However, either way, it confirms the location of the East Gate and the point of alignment for the temple. So based on the abbreviated evidence presented here, I hope you see that a very compelling case can be made for the northern placement of the temple. The strength of the case rests on identifying two reliable landmarks. Together, they present true prima facie evidence. This means that establishing these two landmarks alone is sufficient to prove that this is indeed the former location of the Jewish temple. However, Some argue that this evidence is not enough, insisting that other factors must also be considered, like the availability of water, which was needed in abundance for animal sacrifices. The answer is really quite simple. It was available via aqueducts and cisterns. The remains of a Hasmonean aqueduct were found on the eastern edge of Mount Zion, in front of the Temple Mount. Here's a view of the Temple Mount from the aqueduct remains. Dating from at least the Second Temple period, this proves there was a source of fresh water on the Temple Mount. In the days of the Temple, there was a bridge across this valley, which would have also carried the aqueduct. The remains of the bridge are still visible inside the buildings that now incorporate its arches and hide its ruins from view. However, based on the elevation of the aqueduct, some have argued that the temple could have only been lower down and in a southern location, between Al-Aqsa and the Dome of the Rock, near the Al-Qaz fountain. The idea is that the elevation of the aqueduct is too low to deliver water to the height of the Dome of the Rock platform. And therefore, this precludes the area from being considered as a viable location for the temple. So what can we say to that? First, it's called the Lower Aqueduct because there was an upper one that fed the higher elevations in Jerusalem. It may have fed the Temple Mount too, but its remains within the city have not yet been found. Second, the elevation of the aqueduct is 735 meters above sea level, while the Dome of the Spirits bedrock is at 742 meters. So we're close, but we're 7 meters short. But the Mishnah also records that the temple was on a stepped platform, 6 cubits higher than the courtyard. That means the courtyard of the altar was at 739 meters above sea level. Now this is still higher than the aqueduct, but the cisterns of the temple were below the level of the courtyard, as seen in the survey of Western Palestine map showing the noble sanctuary and its cisterns. For example, the bottom of cistern number 2 in the northeast corner of the platform has an elevation of 728 meters, and it has a capacity of 500,000 gallons. The bottom of cistern number 3, thought to possibly be the bathhouse of the temple, is at 732 meters. And the bottom of cistern number 8, called the Great Sea, which holds up to 2 million gallons, is 723 meters. So all of the cisterns on the temple could have been adequately filled by the lower aqueduct. And yet some deny that the cistern water could have been used for the temple services. But we know from the Mishnah that they did. In the chamber of the exile, there was a fixed cistern with a wheel over it, and from there, water was provided for all of the courtyard. Mishnah Midot 5:4. We can also presume that these cisterns used to work like mikvahs, with water continuously flowing into and out of them. And just like mikvahs, the cisterns weren't stagnant as they are now when they were fully operational. Not all the connections to, from, and between tanks are known, but many connections have been discovered. Based on this evidence, the aqueduct elevation argument against a northern placement for the temple doesn't hold up. Furthermore, trying to place the temple at the Al-Qaz fountain places the threshing floor on a steeply sloped mountain ridge. And with more than 300 cubits of temple courts still required to the east, it seems to be too far from the west, especially compared to the east-west location of the Dome of the Spirits. But based on Ezekiel 47:1, some also say there used to be a spring coming out from under the temple. But this is clearly a future millennial temple prophecy, and the Mishnah counts it as a future prophecy as well, in a passage speaking of the southeast water gate to the court of the priests. And why was it called the water gate? Because they brought in through it the pitcher of water for libation on the festival. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, "In it the water welled up, and in the time to come, from there it will come out from under the threshold of the temple." Mishnah Midot 2:6. This should refute the idea that the only water for sacrifices in the area was the Gihon spring. And it should help explain how water was delivered and used on the Temple Mount. Another popular idea is that the temple was actually in the Ophel area, which is immediately south of the Temple Mount. However, this area has been thoroughly excavated beginning 150 years ago, and no temple remains were found. Major excavations have also taken place in the city of David, which may have found the sacrificial site of Melchizedek, but no temple remains were found there either. Furthermore, looking up from the city of David, you can see Mount Moriah, and the southeast corner of the Temple Mount are above you, which fits very well with the description in 2 Chronicles 5:2. Then Solomon summoned to Jerusalem the elders of Israel, all the heads of the tribes and the chiefs of the Israelite families, to bring up the ark of the Lord's covenant from Zion, the city of David. Another reason we know the temple was outside the city of David was because it was built on a threshing floor, and threshing floors are always near the fields, and located outside of the city, as seen in this threshing photo. Some have also suggested that the Temple Mount is actually the lost fortress Antonia, and not the temple area at all. They argue that the size of the Temple Mount is perfect for housing an entire Roman legion. Of course, it's also the perfect size for housing the temple and its outer courts. And no Roman fort in the world was ever built with such fine-dressed ashlar stones like the ones in the Western Wall tunnels. Plus, Roman legions were regularly redeployed to fight Rome's battles around the empire. Jerusalem was attacked and held by legions only when they rebelled. In peacetime, it held a cohort, 1/10 of a legion. So a smaller fort on the northwest corner of the Temple Mount, as commonly assumed, would be quite adequate. There are also a host of archaeological remains that unequivocally prove the Temple Mount held the temple, like this Greek inscription warning foreigners not to enter the temple area, which was found as spolia near the Lion's Gate. And there have been other amazing finds from the Temple Mount sifting project. They have reported finding First Temple remains in debris excavated from the Temple Mount. And they have also confirmed that the 10th Legion camped there, but only after the temple in Jerusalem were destroyed. There is also a modern scholarly objection to the northern placement of the temple that is based on historic accounts of a defensive fosse and wall north of the temple as reported by Strabo and Josephus. The objection is that if the northern fosse was located here, inside the Temple Mount, then the temple could not have been further north than the Dome of the Rock. However, this idea has no archaeological evidence to support the assumption, and it is therefore purely conjectural. The presumption is based solely on a small depression in the bedrock under the soil that was reported in early surveys. Not only that, but there are multiple locations which potentially fit the historic descriptions of the defensive fosse. George Williams identified the most likely location as the Birket Israel, or Pool of Israel, in his book The Holy City, published in 1849. Here's the Birket Israel circa 1855, as seen looking west from outside the northeast corner of the Temple Mount. The great trench on the north of the Haram, known as Birket Israel, does so entirely answer to the description of the fosse on the north of the temple, as given by both Strabo and Josephus, that I cannot question their identity. The Pool of Israel is now filled in and covered over as a small plaza that leads to the gate of the tribe's entrance. Edward Robinson, for whom Robinson's Arch is now named, also held the view that the Pool of Israel was the fosse. There are also two more sites that deserve better consideration than somewhere inside the Temple Mount area. One, the Pools of Bethesda, which are a deep fosse-like feature north of the temple that was turned into a bath area. And two, the Rockefeller Museum Hill outside the northeast corner of the old city that was also clearly a defensively cut fosse. If you look, you can see the old city northern wall on the left, and the hill to the right that's near the Rockefeller Museum was cut in ancient times to protect the wall, not to make the road. The point of mentioning these other places is not to prove which one fits best, but to show that there are better candidates than trying to imagine a giant defensive wall and a deep fosse inside of the Temple Mount area. With the plurality of possible sites for the defensive fosse, the objection to a northern placement of the temple falls apart. And while this doesn't address every possible question and mystery of the Temple Mount, its structures and how the temple services were performed, etc., it answers the single most important question. Where was it located? But maybe you're wondering why the location even matters. For one, because Jews have been hoping and praying for the temple to be rebuilt for 1,950 years. And for another, the northern location means that if allowed, it can be rebuilt without damage to Muslim buildings. Since 1967, when rebuilding the temple was first conceivably possible, most Israelis have believed that the Dome of the Rock would have to be demolished in order to rebuild the temple, which could cause another unimaginably horrible war. In which case, the desire for peace meant that Israel was willing to wait a little longer for the temple. However, now that it can be confidently asserted that the northern location is the true temple site, a pathway finally exists to negotiate an agreement to peacefully rebuild another Jewish temple, recognizing that Jews, Muslims, and Christians all want access to pray and worship on the Temple Mount. And so perhaps someday soon, a site like this will be seen by a new generation of pilgrims to Jerusalem. And if they do, will they recognize the fulfillment of these scriptures? In that day, I will raise up the tabernacle of David that is fallen, and repair its breaches, and raise up its ruins, and rebuild it as in the days of old. My dwelling place will be with them. I will be their God, and they will be my people. Then the nations will know that I, the Lord, make Israel holy, when my sanctuary is among them forever. These I will bring to my holy mountain and give them joy in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and sacrifices will be accepted on my altar, for my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations. For more evidence on the northern location and why other temple positions don't work, I hope you check out my book. And don't forget to like the video, subscribe to my channel, and please share this with your friends. I hope you order your copy today. Also, check out my blog at endtimesberean.com. Thank you so much for watching my video.